Death by PowerPoint proudly presents translation, compilation, and interpretation, and what they all mean. Translation is the overarching comment. It's the methods used in the translation process are compilation or interpretation. Now, it's really simple. High-level programming languages, anywhere from second generation and above, cannot be understood by the CPU. They need to be translated from the coding language into the executable language. Human-readable code, that is to say source code, must be converted into machine-readable code, and that is the process of translation. So in the diagram there, you see your source code, which looks like a bit of C. The compiler shoves it through and makes it a whole bunch of ones and zeros. Now, it's important to note also a key term here. Object code is code produced by the assembler or the compiler. So, a compiler. All code is translated before the program is executed. That is to say, it is compiled into an executable file. Advantages here. It's more quickly executed as a computer has stored the object code and has a direct understanding of the code, and that entire code can be loaded into memory. Compiled object code is generally smaller than its original source code, but it has its disadvantages too. The code is very much harder to modify. In fact, reverse engineering is the process where you'll take your source code, your compiled code, and try and decompile it. Errors during runtime only appear when the program has been compiled, which means you will need to recompile. Any changes of code, for example, runtime errors that you come across, will need to be recompiled. Testing can be more complex as each change requires recompiling, which is harder to follow from the original algorithm, and so therefore you'll find that a compiled program is generally a longer debugging process. Interpreters, source code is translated line by line immediately. Advantage here, errors can be quickly identified and corrected, and the program can be tested for syntax and runtime errors as each line is executed, and the line with the error only gets retranslated, not the entire program. It's easy to use flags, which is a way of testing later code, and it's also really easy to debug output statements. An example of an interpreted language is JavaScript. There we have some disadvantages. Program execution is slower than compiled code as the code needs to be translated line by line at execution. It's also much easier for the code to be pinched and used by others because you give the source code at the time. You don't compile the program and give a compiled program, you give the source code, and importantly, an interpreter must be installed on the user's machine. So interpreter code also takes up more space because compiled code can be compressed down and made smaller. And as it says there also, the interpreter must be installed on the user's machine. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the results there. Compilation versus interpretation. Compilation, entire source code into machine code used to generate most software applications. So if you download a program and run a program as a .exe on a PC or a .dmg on a Mac, these are compiled. Advantages are the program is fully operational and no translation of source code is required. Once made executable, the compilation is no longer necessary for future use of the software. So when you buy Microsoft Office, you don't buy it with Visual Studio to build your version of Office. You just run it. Due to it being difficult to obtain the source code, it is much more highly protected for the developer. This is why we generally distribute compiled code. And it is difficult, not impossible, but difficult to decompile the source code because a lot of the intrinsic documentation, in fact, all of the intrinsic documentation is lost. Now let's look at interpreter. An interpretation is a process of translating source code into machine code statement by statement, like in JavaScript. It is used to generate web-based scripts these days. It has been used elsewhere as well. Testing the program is easier for developers as the source code is translated and executed line by line. If errors occur, that's on that line. So therefore it's faster for editing. Disadvantages is that you will have to give out your source code, and that means that it can be used, decompiled, or it doesn't even need to be decompiled. It can be used and pinched, and the source code is accessible, which could be a problem for copyright issues. Okay, enough of that. Thank you.